Hello, and welcome back to my studio. Not my real studio. This is, we're back at the Artist Bunkie up at the Rupel cabin on the shore of Batchewana Bay, Lake Superior. This is part 2 of my series about writing my book. And I'm gonna start today on kind of telling my story. I think the way that I'd really like to present this book is kind of in a narrative form. So basically sharing the experiences of my journey from being a kid who liked to draw to ultimately actually achieving that dream and going way beyond my wildest dreams. And so that's the form that the book's going to take. So for today, we're going to start off with my life and as a kid, how I first was exposed to art and how I ultimately developed that passion for it. So stick around, we'll get to that. I think one of the best ways, at least for me, to learn is to follow other people's stories and the examples that they've set, and try and figure out from there how that could apply to me. So yeah, we're going to start today with my early life and how I first became exposed to art. So the first thing is I always had an interest in drawing. And it was really encouraged also by both my parents, in particular my mom. My mom also she had a really good natural aptitude to draw and sketch, and she was always doodling, and her doodles looked like fashion drawings. So I know that's where I get it from. So she always encouraged my brother and sister and I to draw. So there was always pencils and paper. And initially I started, like most people, drawing, just copying comics. So the Charlie Brown, the Peanuts comic strip. That's really my earliest memory of actually drawing anything and actually getting any sort of feedback back where, you could actually draw Charlie Brown where he was recognizable. And yeah, I just knew I liked doing that. Now my brother and sister also liked doing it and had about the same natural aptitude as I did, which was, again, I'm talking back 5, 6, 7 years of age, not very good, not very good at all. But we were always competing to see who could do a Charlie Brown that looked more like Charlie Brown, or to draw Lucy or Linus. And over the course of, the next years of our lives, that was something that all three of us actually did. We would probably, between the three of us, we'd spend several hours a week drawing. I think my sister very early kind of lost interest in it, but my brother still drew for quite a number of years. And I can remember when we were maybe 12 and 13 years old. So my brother was a year older than me. And my aunt, who was a teacher, she was starting the school year and she wanted some pictures of dinosaurs, some drawings of dinosaurs to hang up in her class. And she asked my brother and I if we could do drawings of dinosaurs for her. And we both did that. And so I think he ended up doing a couple, and I did a couple. And we were kind of debating back and forth. Oh, mine's better than yours. He said, no, I think mine's better than yours. And they were both kind of about the same level. And I think that's really important to note too, because I think people assume that when someone that, again, I'm in my late 50s, almost 60, and have achieved a lot of skill as an artist, they kind of assume you had that as a kid, or at least that you were head and shoulders above others. And my brother and I were pretty equal when it came to drawing ability up until we were like 12 and 13 years of age. And it was at that point really that I just realized this was a passion I wanted to throw myself into. And my brother at that time started taking apart washing machines and radios and everything else. And he ultimately went into engineering, and that became his passion. And the thing is, now if you were to ask my brother to draw, he draws like a pretty good 12-year-old, which is where he lost interest in it. So again, I'm a really firm believer that the ultimate kind of level that you achieve with your art really has nothing to do with where you start. It's like trying to predict if you had a group of kindergarten kids and had them all do a 50-yard dash. It's be like trying to predict who would be likely to win a marathon 25 years later. It's like the one who's going to win the marathon is the one who's going to do the most work, the most training. Now, natural aptitude comes into it. Sure, if you have someone with a really high natural aptitude that also has an amazing work ethic, then that is going to work. But for the most part, it's like that old tale of the tortoise and the hare. It's just slow and steady wins the race at the end. So, anyways, that's about my brother and I, and again about the fact that he and I were about the same. So I was not a gifted child. There was always kids in my class who were better than me, and I can specifically remember a few kids who were much better than me in grade 2, grade 5, grade 7. And so I was not the best artist in the class, not by a long shot. So another thing that happened to me when I was young, and actually I was talking about this last night just with a group of artists that were up here at the Rupel Cabin, that I vividly remember a trip to the McMichael Gallery in grade 2. And so the McMichael Gallery, for those of you who don't know it, is in Kleinburg, Ontario, but it is known as the spiritual home of the Group of Seven. And the Group of Seven was a group of Canadian painters. They and Tom Thompson really defined what Canadian landscape painting would be for a number of years. They were the first ones to really go north and west and out into the wilderness and paint in the early 1900s. And actually, this area where I am now is Group of Seven country, which is why I love it so much and why I love coming up here to paint. But I remember being at the McMichael Gallery, and it was your typical grade 2 trip. So a lot of the kids were not that interested in the art. They were running around, throwing their mittens at each other. It was a winter day. And I can still remember standing in front of some of the paintings and just being in awe. And then when the person who was conducting the tour told us the story about the Group of Seven, about them, going out and being on the Agua Canyon train and staying on the caboose, for a week and painting and going out camping and hiking and painting, I just knew that, oh man, I would love to do that. And I'd never ever actually seen oil paints before or anything like that, but we saw a little video and it showed, mixing the paints and showed films of them painting. And I just knew that was something I wanted to do. It's like it is almost just like a gut reaction. And that was the same thing when I saw great art or art that really moved me. I just knew that was something I loved looking at. But it was also something I thought, wow, I would love to be able to do that one day. So that, I think, was that trip to the McMichael Gallery was the first kind of creative spark that I had, that I just knew I was really fascinated with art and the idea of being an artist. But, as I say, I wasn't that good. I was pretty good, but I certainly wasn't the best in my class. But I was really smart when it came to math, English, history. So all through my public school, and even going up to high school, I took art. It was like the option art class, but it was one of my worst marks. I did much better. I got 90s in math. I got 90s in English and in history, and in art, I got like 70s or 80s. So while I knew that I really, really enjoyed it, I also knew that wasn't my strengths. And so I had kind of decided early on that maybe I would be a veterinarian. I really, really enjoyed animals and working with animals. And I thought that would be something that I could do, where I could also use what were my strengths, which was more the core kind of curriculum subjects, much more than art. But then around high school, so I was in kind of a unique situation. I started kindergarten in grade 4, and then I skipped a year. So I was 12 going into high school when, people in my class were 14, 15. We even had kids who were 16 years old in grade 9, and I was 12. So I was quite a bit younger than everyone else. But it was around the time I went into high school that I really started just spending a lot of my time. I was just up in my room drawing. And what I started drawing, I'd initially drawn from the comics, like the Charlie Browns, as I mentioned earlier. But then I got into a lot of the sword and sorcery comic books that were really well illustrated. And I started kind of copying those. And then I actually started, I would go out and actually buy novels. Again, the heroic fantasy type, with these, with the figures of the muscular men with the swords and that type of thing. My favorite painters at that time were Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo. But I would out and go actually buy paperbacks just for the cover art, and then I would come home and copy those illustrations. And that's actually what instilled in me a real love of reading, because I thought, since I've got these books, I may as well read them. But I would go out at Christmas time, and if I got $20, I would go into the bookstore, and you could get paperbacks then for like 99 cents. So I would go in and buy 15 or 16 paperbacks after Christmas. And not only would I read them, but I would also copy the art that was on them. And I was spending a lot of time doing this. And I was not taking art in high school. I wasn't even taking the option art class. So the school that I went to, which was Cedar Break Collegiate in Scarborough, they had a really, really good art program. They had a commercial art program that had four classes. So basically half your curriculum in high school would be art if you were taking the commercial art program. And so the classes were layout and lettering, illustration, media and techniques, and life drawing. Then you also had the option of taking just the regular art class. So you could be potentially taking 5 of your 9 subjects would be art. Well, when I was in grade 8 and we were picking our courses for high school and having to decide kind of what were the things maybe that we wanted to go into, our art teacher had said, like, taking art at Cedar Brae is not like taking art so far where it's just come in and kind of do your best. It's like, this is for really serious people who you have to be really good to be able to excel in the course and even to pass the course. So this is not like for the average person, and I would recommend for most of you not considering taking art. And I thought that was me. Again, I was still at the point that I wasn't that good compared to my peers, that I felt he was speaking to me as well. So I never took art in grade 9 or in grade 10. And then it was in grade 11. By the time I got to grade 11, I was spending probably 10 hours a week after school, after I finished my homework and when I wasn't playing sports. I'd be up in my room drawing, and just drawing. And then I actually started using my birthday and Christmas money, and I had a job by then too, part-time job. So I would spend that money on art supplies and books, and I started experimenting with painting in acrylics and painting in oils, and was just doing all of this because I was developing that passion for art, and I was getting better. The more that I did, the more I was really getting better. And then it was around the first kind of few weeks of grade 11. And then I remember it was in like the second or third week of grade 11, there was a friend of mine who I'd gone to school with since public school, who was in the art program, and he was showing me some of the stuff that he was doing in there. And I realized, I thought, I can do this. And I also knew, well, I was as good as this guy back when we were in public school. And if he can take the art program, then I think I should be able to too. But by that time I knew that if I had my wish of anything in the world, that's what I wanted to be, was an artist. And so I went home and had the conversation with my parents that, you know what, I really, really want to pursue art. I don't want to be a vet. I want to be an artist. And they'd seen enough of all of the time that I was spending on this to kind of take that seriously. And the one thing I have to really thank my parents for is that they supported us, all 3 of us kids, in kind of whatever we wanted to do. And they always raised us saying, like, whatever you want to do, if you're willing to work hard enough at it, you can achieve success at it. And I really believed that. So now we're in a conundrum. It's kind of, I'm in grade 11. I'd missed the first 2 years of the commercial art program in my high school. It's like the question then became, could I just come in 2 years late and kind of pick up? And fortunately, the head of the art department at my high school had been a teacher at my dad's school, and my dad went to high school, and he was the hockey coach. And my dad was a really, really talented hockey player. He played junior A, he ended up getting signed with the Boston Bruins. He never ended up playing because of injuries, but he knew this this teacher really, really well when he was back in high school, and that fellow was now the head of the art department at the high school I went to. So my dad called him up and explained the situation and asked if we could come in. So I still remember that day. It was a day back in those days where your parents got dressed up to go into the school. So my mom had a nice dress on, and my dad had, he was all gussied up, and they came in. So the appointment was made. I got called out of class to then come in with my parents to meet the head of the art department. And I also had to bring a portfolio of work. So I had to bring in like a sample of 10 or 15 things that I had been doing. So I brought in a bunch of the work that I had at home, and they sat down, they looked at the work, and they talked about kind of what I wanted, why I wanted to do this and the expectations and everything else. And ultimately I was allowed to get parachuted into the art program in grade 11. So that was kind of like a huge eye-opener for me, because I had no formal training in art, and all of a sudden I was dropped in next to these kids who had been taking half of their curriculum as art for the past 2 years. So I still vividly remember that, those first days that when I switched, and these were all people that I knew because we'd gone to school together, but I'd never been in an art class with them, and I was just like so naive in terms of what I knew about art. I'd actually developed a pretty good skill set in my ability to draw, so that was good. But I remember they'd give us projects to do, and I had no idea what flat color meant, or we were doing a lot of stuff where it was specifically the projects where if you were doing this for a client and it was going to be reproduced. And this was before digital photography and computers and all that. So a lot of it was, I'm not going to go into it, but most of you now wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. But I was so far behind in terms of the knowledge of the various processes and the terms and all that, but I was able to hold my own kind of skill set wise. And so over the course of the next 2 years, I was able to go to school, and basically 5 of my subjects were art. So over half of my day, every day, was in art class. And that's where I took life drawing classes for the first time in my life. And so we used to get life drawing classes 3 times a week, where it would be like an hour and a half you were drawing from life, from models. And I was just in heaven. That, and then our illustration class, and then in media and techniques, it was just exposing us to all of these different things. So, we got exposed to oil paints, acrylic paints, charcoal, painting by doing an underpainting and glazing, watercolor, drawing in line, but just exposed to all of these different things that were out there, and different tools and materials that were available to create art. And then we also had a layout and lettering class, which was not my favorite. I wanted to be involved in the part of art where you were actually drawing or painting. Not so much the graphic side of things, but that still was very good and has helped me very much, later in my career. So for that 2 years, I threw myself into the art, and I was a dream student. I applied myself 100% in class, and then I went home and I worked on this stuff, and I was just trying to do the best that I could, and just loving it. And I actually got to the point where by the end of high school, I'd say I was in probably the top 15 or 20%. I would rate myself amongst the other people taking the course. So I still was by no means the best. There were a number of people in my classes who were better than me, but I was certainly in the top half, and maybe even to the top quarter. And then when I finished grade 12, that was the end of the program, because the program in Ontario schools at that time, there was 2 streams of education. There was the advanced program, which focused on the maths and the sciences and the Englishes, and that went to grade 13. And then there was kind of more the ones that were training you for a career, and that went to grade 12. So I was kind of a unique situation, that I was taking the arts for the kind of the general program, but I was still taking all the advanced courses, so the maths and the English and sciences. So after I finished grade 12, I stayed for grade 13. And in that year, there was only the one option art program, which was kind of a general art program that was for people who had sort of an interest in art, but it wasn't for people who were thinking of making a career out of art. But I stayed that extra year in high school because I was so young. At that point, I was 16 years old, and would have been going off to college at 16, and that was just too young. So I also knew that at that time, if you had grade 13, you could take a year of teachers college and teach. And I thought, well, one day I might want to teach art, and so having that extra year in school would serve me well. So I stayed till grade 13, but I knew where I was going to be going to college. There was a George Brown College, which is a community college in Toronto, had a very good graphic design program, and it was also pushed very heavily by the head of the art department at our school in terms of it being a really good training ground to become a professional artist or a graphic designer. And so, yeah, I think I should mention at that time too. So there was, at that time, I mean, there was a lot of the art programs. So if you were to take art at a university, there was a lot of stuff going on where it was not about teaching you the skills and the concepts. It was all about creativity and nothing about skill. So you might get an assignment that just said, I want you to paint what the wind sounds like. And it's like, well, how do you do that? I don't know. But there was very little instruction going on, very little demonstration. And it was all more philosophical stuff and the real artsy fartsy stuff. And to be a commercial artist or a graphic designer, you needed the skills. So that's why this college was really so heavily recommended. Is they were teaching the skills. They were teaching all of the skills that would be required to go out and get a job as a graphic designer. So at 17 years of age, I graduated high school, and I went down and applied to George Brown. And so you had to actually submit a portfolio of work. They also had a test where you had to show up, and you had like an hour and a half to do a line drawing of a still life they had set up. And then based on that, they selected who would be allowed to attend. So I managed to get through the selection process. So there I was, 17 years old, heading off to become a very successful artist and starting university. And we'll maybe pick that up next time.